Welcome to COM 100, the online version. This is the first video in the series, so you won't see me today. Later on, you will see me do some of the speeches so that you can actually get a sense of what things should look like and the different kinds of choices you can make as a speaker. But today we're just going to get through one of the most common questions that people have about communication. So we're going to begin with the key question. Are you nervous about public speaking? And most people are. Most people are a little nervous about getting in front of a group of people or a video and giving a speech. That's totally normal. You've been trained your whole life to be nervous about public speaking. And the little subtext there, the kill it or run, refers to the reason for that. Your body interprets social threats as if they're physical threats and keys what is called the fight or flight reflex, which basically means when something scares you, your body says, quick, let's get all energized so we can use that energy to either kill the thing that's scaring us or run away from it. Now, out in the wilderness or in the Wild West, that might be a good move. But if your boss comes in and asks you to give a presentation to the other coworkers, killing him or running away probably isn't the best way to handle this. So first of all, what are the symptoms of communication anxiety? Most people feel fear in the kinds of ways in which their body begins to betray them. That is, they begin to feel like they're overheating. If you have a pale complexion, you might blush a little bit or get little splotchy marks on your body. You might get sweaty or even a little shaky. You might have trouble breathing. You might have memory issues, shifty movements, all kinds of fun things. Now, all of this stuff is interesting because if you were to ask a professional athlete how they felt before a really big game, you would get many of the same experiences. Again, it's that fight or flight reflex kicking in. Their body is amping up. And the reason why is because your body is a little dumb. Basically, your body is trying to take over anytime you get afraid. So when you get afraid, your body says, quick, let's go to the backup plan, which is that classic fight or flight reflex. And that's your autonomic system. That's the systems that control your breathing, your heart rate, things like that. Things you don't have to think about to do, but you can have some control over. And the biggest problem for us is that instead of processing what's happening in your surroundings, you're now reacting to them. So instead of just being able to think of what your next main point might be, or a particular phrase you wanted to use, or even adapting to the way the audience is reacting to you. So for example, if an audience member looks confused, a processing response might have you go off your script a little bit and try to explain the issue until that confused look goes away. But a reaction simply says, that person's confused and I'm a terrible speaker, and you freeze up. We don't want to have that happening. So, your body is stupid. Here's what I mean by that. Your body has taken fear, which is something that's legitimate, right? If somebody points a gun at you, it's fine to be afraid. If you almost get into a car accident, it's fine to be afraid. If you think you might be ill, it's fine to be afraid. And your body reacts to all those things in exactly the same way as it would react to trying to ask somebody out on a date. And that right there, folks, is proof that your body is pretty dumb. Your body has not yet figured out that there are social threats which are different from physical threats, right? These social threats, things like fear of being embarrassed, fear of somebody not liking you, fear of not getting a promotion or getting a job because of a job interview, those are all threats. Those are all important things. We should be concerned about them, but your body's reacting to them in a way that says, we could punch it or run away from it, and that's just not a good way to go. So what are the kinds of social threats that trigger the fight or flight reflex? The reason I talk about this is most people seem to think only of stage fright, that is, the fear of public speaking. Jerry Seinfeld had a classic joke that said that the number one fear in America is public speaking, and the number two fear in America is death, which means that if you're at a funeral, you would rather be the person in the box than the person giving the eulogy. And that's normal. The reason why that's normal is that you've been trained throughout your life to not want to be the speaker. When you went to kindergarten, your teacher's job was to make sure you took turns when you spoke. When you went to grade school and high school, if you spoke out of turn, your teacher might even punish you with a public speech by saying, do you have anything you would like to share with the rest of the class? You've been taught your whole life not to speak in public, so it's only natural that your body says, I don't like doing that. But there are other kinds. You might, for example, be nervous around authority figures or nervous around members of the opposite sex or somebody you find attractive. Those are also social threats that might make you feel a little nervous. So there's many kinds of communication anxiety. Remember that, not just stage fright. You're speaking right now, you're hearing somebody who is a very accomplished public speaker. I competed in state and high school competitions, and in college I was at national competitions and have tons and tons of trophies. But I simply don't have stage fright. Now, if you put me in a job interview, I would be just as nervous as you are. If you put me in a romantic situation, I would be freaked out. Folks, my wife asked me out. I am not the kind of person who has any kind of game when it comes to the ladies. So there's all kinds of anxiety. The key question is figuring out how to handle it. So I do have some bad news for you. You can't just stop having communication anxiety. Can't happen. It simply can't be done. I can't simply talk you out of ever feeling nervous ever again. It's just not a way to do it. A good example of this would be many of you might have had a friend who broke up with somebody that they'd had a really terrible relationship with, that nobody seemed to be happy. And even after that terrible relationship ended, they still felt sad. Even though they knew logically they shouldn't be feeling sad, they should be happy, you can't talk somebody out of having an emotion. And that's the approach I like to take. I don't want to tell you that having communication anxiety is wrong, quit it, knock it off, or walk it off. Instead, I want you to understand that communication anxiety is actually normal, which leads me to the worst news. Here's the worst news. I don't want you to stop having communication anxiety. I want you to be a little bit afraid. I want you to always have a little bit of fear when you get up to give any given speech. Well, you're probably having one of these four reactions. Either you're saying, wait a second, I thought this guy was going to help us out. He seemed so nice. But now it turns out, just like Will Ferrell said in Elf, that I sit on a throne of lies. Or maybe you're just shocked, like sudden clarity Clarence there in the upper right corner. Or it's a giant trap, like Admiral Akbar would say. Or maybe you're just upset and disappointed, like poor Captain Picard in the bottom corner. All of you are thinking, wait a second, I thought this guy was going to help us. There is good news, folks. And the good news is that everybody can get better at giving public speeches, but I don't necessarily want you to stop being nervous about giving public speeches. So I'm not a monster. Why don't I want you to stop being nervous? Simple as this. Any person you've ever heard give a terrible, boring, mind-numbing speech is probably a person who didn't care very much about their speech or about the audience they were giving it to. And that's why the speech wasn't very successful. Caring what the audience thinks is actually one of the keys to giving a good speech. All those social threats, like embarrassment or approval, are signs that you care what the audience thinks. If you care what they think, that's a good thing, because it's probably going to encourage you to give a better speech. So how do I follow through on my promise in helping you give good speeches, even though you might be a little nervous? Simple as this. You're going to still be a little afraid, but you're going to be able to manage the symptoms because you'll recognize what they are and why they're doing what they're doing to you, and you'll also take steps to prevent the symptoms in the first place. Any of you who haven't seen our second Will Ferrell reference of the lecture here, the Talladega Nights video, this particular character is somebody who's a race car driver. He gets into a car accident and because of it is afraid to ever race again. He can't even drive a normal car at anything above a walking speed. Until a friend of his, actually his father, gives him the advice that he needs to learn how to drive with fear. And his suggestion is he puts a mountain lion in the car with him. And this is after the training montage, and we see that Will Ferrell is now comfortable and happy driving with his fear. It's a great metaphor for what I want you to do in your speeches. I want the fear to be there, but I want it to be totally manageable and well-behaved. And that's why I'm going to give you 10 steps to help you be more comfortable and address the symptoms that go along with communication anxiety. There are 10 steps. Now they fall into different categories because each one of them comes at a different stage in the process of getting ready for the speech. The first several are all in the preparation phase. So number one, don't procrastinate. When you're afraid of something, it doesn't get better by waiting. If you think something's scary underneath your bed or in the closet, the longer you wait, the more scary it gets. So letting something go to the last possible minute doesn't improve your anxiety in any way. In fact, it usually makes it worse. A lot of students who leave stuff to the last minute get extra adrenaline and extra fear because they're afraid of the exciting nature of the deadline. That's not something we want. We want you to have this all taken care of in advance so that you get rid of one of the controllable aspects of your fear. Second, ask questions. The most common mistake that people make in communication is that they are expecting themselves to have to be held to a so much higher of a standard than they really are. In the class like this, what will happen is you will think, Shannon wants me to give a speech that is amazing, when in fact all I want is a speech that meets certain requirements. So you end up working on parts of the speech that I'm not really going to grade, and you end up as a result missing the parts that I want you to focus on. So when you're nervous, think of it this way. Asking a question gets rid of uncertainty, and it's the uncertainty that's making you afraid. So while you're working on an outline or doing some research, you might suddenly think to yourself, I'm not sure if this fits the assignment. A quick email to me makes that anxiety go away. Either you'll ask me a question and I'll say that you're doing great, and that'll make you feel good, or you'll ask me a question and I'll notice a problem and I'll fix it for you, and that'll make you feel good too. But notice how rule number 2 relates to rule number 1. If you don't procrastinate, then you have time to ask a question. But if you wait until 11 o'clock the night before something is due, then I'm probably not going to be on my phone ready to respond to your last minute question. You need to get questions in early, and that'll make you feel better early too. Third, be sure to practice. Most people make the mistake of writing out their speech, and then the moment they finish writing the very last sentence, they save the document and print it and think, now I'm done with my speech. Writing a speech is only part of actually giving a speech. So you need to actually turn the document into notes or speaking materials and then practice from them, and practice for real. Don't just talk to yourself or whisper it or just read through it. Actually stand up and give the speech at full volume, because that's when you're going to spot little mistakes. You'll catch typos, you'll even catch words that you have trouble saying and figure out you need to find a replacement. One example happened to me. The first year I was in competition, a topic came up that kept having us talk about agriculture, and one of the words we used a lot was rural, R-U-R-A-L, rural areas. I have trouble saying that word. So anytime I would give a speech that needed to use it, I would get rid of the word rural, which I still have trouble saying, and replace it with farmland, or non-urban areas, or the countryside. All of these things were easier to say and made the speech easier to give. So practice. It'll also help you make sure you're nailing the time limit, which is kind of a key factor in some of the grading in our class. So the more times you practice a speech, the more comfortable you'll be. Since you're turning in the speeches by video, you can even do more than one take if you'd like to. You could video yourself, watch the video, notice some things you want to change, and then do it again. Or you might nail it in one take and just turn that copy in. Either way, every time you go through the speech, you give a better speech. Now the big space there on the PowerPoint is because we've moved from the preparation phase of a speech to right before you give the speech, like in the hours leading up to the speech. So rule number 4, eat normally. We talked about how your body is stupid. Well, your body's a stupid machine. It just basically wants to do the things it does. It wants to breathe, it wants to eat, it wants to do other stuff. You need to fuel it the same way you always would. A common mistake people will make if they get nervous during speeches is they will starve themselves. That's actually a really bad plan. It messes with your blood sugar. It can cause your stomach to feel more fluttery than usual because of the buildup of acid. So whatever you normally do when it comes to food, keep doing that. You'll still feel a lot more comfortable. Now, if you're somebody who tends to feel nervousness in your stomach, you should still eat, but what you should do instead is eat smart. Maybe, for example, avoiding spicier foods, or eating foods that are more starchy if you're the kind of person who likes starchy foods. Those kinds of things can naturally calm you down. Just like your mom gave you some saltine crackers when you were sick, starchy foods tend to naturally settle your stomach. Dress appropriately. And by appropriate, I actually have 2 meanings. One of them is more important in my opinion, the comfort level. If you don't feel physically comfortable, you're messing with your stupid body, right? If you're already having difficulty because your body doesn't feel good, putting on a tie that's too tight for you or shoes that are uncomfortable or anything will simply make you feel more uncomfortable and make your body have to work harder to give a speech. So you should dress in a way that feels comfortable. Now, the second part is the other reason that I mentioned there's two elements here. Appropriate also means you should be appropriate to the social situation. So yeah, flannel pajamas is probably not the way to go for a job interview. Even though it's physically comfortable, you would feel out of place socially. So socially feel comfortable. Dressing up just a little bit for a speech often makes students feel a little more formal, and that naturally makes you speak differently. You'll have better posture, you'll try to use less slang. All those things rub off. It's almost like putting on a suit of armor between you and the anxiety. So dress comfortably and dress appropriate to the situation. Go before you go. Remember that body that's so dumb? Well, one of the experiences people sometimes have when they're nervous is they might feel like they need to go to the bathroom. If you take care of that in advance, then you will have made yourself feel more comfortable and not have to take a break or stop mid-speech or just feel uncomfortable. My favorite example here is I love telling students that even though I liked the Lord of the Rings movies, here's what I remember about the end of every single one of them. I had to pee. So no matter what was happening on the screen, no matter what character development was occurring or cool special effect or whatever, all that was going through my head was, I need to go to the bathroom. If I'm doing that, I'm not focusing on the film. If you're doing that, you're probably not focusing on giving a good speech. So take care of this stuff in advance. By the way, notice how that also relates to number 5. Run into the bathroom just before a presentation gives you an opportunity to make sure you still look right and everything's in the place it's supposed to be. All right, now we're actually into the speech. During the speech, the most perfect rule comes from the Karate Kid, the original version. Don't forget to breathe. It's kind of important. The most common mistake people make while they give speeches is they try to speak too quickly. And when they speak too quickly, they run out of air. That's going to happen no matter how good of a speaker you are, simply because of this. Think about most of the talking you do every day. It's almost always done with one other person. So that means you're speaking a little more softly, because it's not to an entire audience of people, and you're taking turns. The other person is giving you a second to catch up. You say a thing or two, then stop. They say a thing or two while you recover your breathing. But when you give a 6-minute speech, you don't have those breaks. So make sure you slow down just a little bit and allow yourself some time to breathe. Notice this also relates to number 7. Number 7 relates to number 3. If you practice your speech, you'll notice the spots where you keep running out of air, and you can make a note on your script or even change the script, like put in a page turn. And those things will give you an opportunity to catch up and get your breathing back together. Number 8, don't lock your knees. If you've ever heard of somebody passing out during a speech or a presentation of some kind, this was usually at least part of the reason why that happened. A lot of people think that they look nervous if they don't stand perfectly still. Well, when you do that, you actually kind of mess with your blood pressure and the blood flow in your body by locking your knees in place. Your body doesn't like that. We want instead for you to feel comfortable. If you've ever seen somebody at an outdoor wedding get a little lightheaded, I guarantee at least part of it was because their posture was too rigid. So you should move around a little just to be comfortable. Not so much that you look like you didn't follow rule number 6, but in a way that makes you feel appropriate and comfortable while you give the speech. Don't use your imagination. No matter what you've seen on any of those stupid sitcoms that always tell people how terrible public speaking is, they say things like, imagine the audience is in their underwear or the audience is naked. It's a terrible piece of advice. Your brain should be used for only one thing, giving the speech. Imagine the audience isn't wearing clothes isn't helping you. Now, the idea behind this lesson was always that you should imagine the audience members are just people like you. There's better ways to do that than to try to imagine them wearing only underwear. And that would be number 10. Find a happy place. You will almost always find members of the audience who are giving you good feedback. Some of you will be giving all of your speeches in this class only to the camera. But a good idea might be to have a friend or two actually sit behind the camera and give you somebody to feed off of, as long as they're not going to mess you up during the speech. Just simply having a person hear you speak and then nod their head at you will make you feel more comfortable. And my favorite example happens all the time. You'll start to stutter or have trouble finding a word, and you'll look at that person and you'll see them nodding at you like somebody looking at a kid taking their first steps, basically saying, "You can do it!" That kind of feeling just obviously makes you want to give a better speech, and that's a good thing to have. Now, in some audiences, you might have audience members who aren't being good audience members. They might be looking at their own stuff or distracted by something else. Just ignore them. focus on the people you are reaching, at least until you get more comfortable. As you get more confident as a speaker, you might even be able to take on some of these folks. But notice how in all 10 of my steps, I didn't for a second tell you that it was terrible that you are nervous about public speaking. It's totally natural. But by using these 10 steps, you can make yourself feel more comfortable when you do give speeches.